What's up?
Good?
What's good?
How's everyone doing?
Welcome back.
Why did I say that? They can't respond back to
Oh
me.
my God. Yes, they can.
Welcome back to the Imperfect Podcast. I am Steven.
And I'm Akko.
And we are here with the second installment
yes.
of our leadership series.
Yes.
We are going to be going over the foundations of leadership.
Foundations of leadership.
So exciting.
Grab your pens, grab your notebooks, grab your coffee.
Grab your dog.
Grab everything that you need to do. Pack if you need a pack.
Yeah.
We're going to go deep into this.
Put your pants on.
Anyways, the foundations of leadership, man. Okay, so we thought we were gonna give you guys kind of like a little structure of how this episode is gonna be going.
Yeah, what's the rundown?
So we're gonna touch on first defining what is leadership, right? Mm-hmm. So we're gonna touch on what is leadership.
Yeah.
We're gonna touch on worldly versus biblical leadership.
Yeah.
We're gonna touch on a few leadership principles that we see from the Bible.
Absolutely.
And then we're gonna cap it off with the ultimate example of leadership. Mm-hmm. Hint, hint. Jesus.
Jesus,
come on.
Jesus Cristo. Okay.
And then finally, we're going to finish up with practical takeaways. So for you guys that are kind of expecting a timeline of how that's going to go, again, we're going to touch on what is leadership. We're going to touch on worldly leadership versus biblical leadership.
Yeah.
We're going to touch on principles, and then the ultimate example and practical takeaways.
I feel like we need like a bulletin.
I know, right? I have my notes over here, but yes. You can tell how much we prepared. But tell me, Steven, okay, let's start off with leadership in general. I know a lot, that word, we're going to say it a lot. You guys are going to hear it a lot. Oh, and yes. A lot of people have different examples or different definitions of how they define it. I'm curious, how would you define leadership? And I have my own definition, but how would you define the leadership?
I think kind of off the cuff, or not really off the cuff, but kind of how I initially think about it is the role or the person who has almost the final say in the decisions that get made and the way rhythms are set or systems are set.
Okay.
And that can be either achieved through, actually it's just achieved of how you behave and how people perceive you, whether that's ill-gained or through honest gain of influence. So you could almost bring it down to influence.
Ooh, okay. I like that. So leadership is influence.
Yeah. I
like that.
Yeah.
Okay. I, on the other hand, I think I would define it more so from the perspective of taking on a burden of responsibility. And I think we touched on this. We're going to get more into it too. But I think leadership starts with self, right?
Yeah.
You need to own yourself, own the responsibility of taking care of your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health, your emotional health.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the concept of leadership kind of gets birthed, or the seed is planted, in the sense of how do you own the burden of responsibility of yourself. Yeah. Right? Because the way you take care of yourself, the way you nurture that burden, is the way it pours out to the other people that you start becoming responsible for. Right? Yeah. So whether it's family, whether it's spouse, whether it's school, whether it's work, whether it's church, whether it's homework or whatever the case may be, you know, you're gonna go through rhythms and moments and seasons where you're gonna gain responsibility over someone or something. Right?
Absolutely.
And the way you bear that burden and the way you walk through being responsible for that person or thing is, in my idea, how leadership is defined through it.
It's demonstrated through your leadership.
Exactly, right?
I got you.
So I think that's kind of how I would define leadership from my perspective. But what about you guys? Be thinking about how you've defined leadership in the past, or how you might even define it today, as we kind of get into the weeds of foundations.
What definition do you have? What is the image that comes to mind when we say leadership? Like good leader, bad leader. What comes most readily to your head?
Sure. I'm glad you said good leader, bad leader, because the next area that we're going to kind of touch on is worldly leadership versus biblical leadership. Now, take it away. Like, what are some ideas or differences, or even like similarities that somebody might have? Somebody, for example, might say, well, leadership is leadership. It doesn't matter if it's worldly or biblical.
Right.
Like, a leader is a leader, and at the end of the day, they have to get stuff done, and they have to do it the right way. Is there a right way? Like, how do you define it? What would you kind of speak to in this context of looking between worldly versus biblical leadership?
Yeah, I think for worldly versus biblical leadership, they share the same end word, not root word, but
Okay.
the same word of leadership, and that's kind of where I synced in with my definition.
Okay.
No, actually, I do love your definition of leadership. I really do agree with it.
Yeah.
But both leaders are influential in some
Yeah.
some form or fashion.
Yeah.
Right. I think one of the main key differences is that influence and the direction where people are putting their attention to. Where is where are people's attention being pointed to? And I fully believe a lot of times worldly leadership is either predicated on bringing everyone's attention on myself or on destroying and breaking down other people. Whereas biblical leadership is actually no. I have your attention, and I'm going to point it out to somewhere else to go and serve other people, and I'm going to have you build up other people.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And so, I mean, we can talk about it where worldly leadership. This comes back down to even the Bible, where you know, gosh, now I'm forgetting it, but it's like the pride of life, lust of the eyes, and there's like one other thing
Okay.
that we've talked about, but it all pulls into that of where you have worldly leadership is how can I influence other people to serve me? How can I influence other people to bring their attention on me and only care about what I care about? You see that in social dynamics, man. A really great way to figure out like worldly leadership. Just go to high school. just go to high school, and you'll see the dynamics.
Some people are in high school listening to this podcast.
If you're in high school, you will totally see that as no one's an appointed leader, but you have the so-called it person where everyone looks to. What do you think?
Yeah.
You have the final say in who's cool or not cool.
Popularity, yeah.
And so whether that's ill-gotten or proven through the merit of your characteristics and your morals, you cannot deny that they have influence and they're leading a group of people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that influence is almost just tossed onto you. And the difference is a worldly leader is going to say, oh, I can use this influence to serve myself and make myself feel better.
That's true. I can bring order, but I can make that order
all funnel to me.
I like
exactly.
that. I like that.
Whereas biblical leadership is an understanding, and obviously we're going to get down to Jesus Christo, all the things, of where there's a very solid understanding that you want to have that influence and you want to direct that influence towards building people closer to God and serving others.
Yeah.
And that's radically different.
Yeah.
Radically different.
Man, I really like that. You touched on a lot of the points that I was finding out when I was doing my research, and that when you compare worldly leadership versus biblical leadership, you find the idea of where do I fit in that story, right? Like, am I being praised? Am I being magnified? Am I being zoomed into? Or are the people that I'm responsible for and the people that I'm quote unquote leading, are they being praised? Are they being magnified? Are they being poured into? But I love when you brought the word up, the word servant, because I think anytime we think serve, you're like, oh, as a follower, you're called to serve. You're called to serve the leader. You're called to follow the leader, right? I think that's another way we can use that word serve. But when we take a deep dive into biblical leadership, service starts in the leader, the person up top.
Absolutely.
He's the one that serves. He's the one that switches the dime or the paradigm and says, hey, you might think that like I'm here for you to follow me, but actually no, I'm here to serve you. Like I'm here to be the one that drops down, gets dirty, and like we're gonna talk a lot about this, and I'm sure you guys are hinting at where we're getting at when we talk about service. Right. But I think that's actually a really good piece of the puzzle when we try to describe the difference between worldly leadership and biblical leadership. Yeah. And then another thing that you also touched on, I love the example of someone in high school, because if you think about it, like I picture this, I'm going to set the stage. Imagine you're an 8th grader, you've gone through the summer, or think back to your 8th grade year of middle school, you've gone through the summer, whether you were the cool kid or whether you're the nerd or whether you're somewhere in between, like there was some sense of like urgency and like a fear knowing that freshman year of high school was on the horizon.
Oh yeah.
Especially like if you went to a high school where, for me personally, I'm gonna give you an example for me. I didn't know the high school that I was going to. Like I didn't know, I had just moved to the area. and I didn't know what to expect. And then add on the fact that I'm international. I'm Kenyan. You guys don't hear my accent, but back then it was thick. I talk like this. I talk with a very deep African accent, and I can bring it back sometimes, but it was thick, man. It was. So I have the extra added layer of like fear when it comes to where I know for a fact I'm gonna be bullied. I know for a fact there's gonna be so much chaos. There's gonna be so much craziness, and I'm gonna be on the bottom of that barrel when it comes to bringing order to it.
Being third world country. Yeah.
So think about your experience when you were going into high school. Like, were you on the opposite end of the spectrum where you look forward to being the leader of the crowd, the it person, the popular guy?
Sure.
Or were you nervous and you were thinking, oh my goodness, like, I hope I don't get bullied.
How am I going to fit in?
How am I going to fit in?
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm asking you guys to think back to that is when you go into high school, whatever side of the spectrum you're in, there's a lot of chaos. There's chaos in that setting that you're going into.
Absolutely.
Brand new school, brand new setup. You're being asked to grow up, especially coming from an 8th grade year. You gotta make new friends. You gotta start thinking about sports. You gotta start thinking about girlfriends and boyfriends, and your grades, etc., etc. There's just so much chaotic things that are happening all at once. And here's where leadership comes in. It's bringing order to that chaos. And I love that you mentioned hints of that, because when you look at whatever the dynamic of what your high school experience was like, whether you were the bully or the one getting bullied, you were inside that paradigm of there was chaos and there was order being brought to it, and you were maybe on the receiving end of that order, or you're the one that was initiating it, from a bully's perspective, for example, or from somebody who was popular,
or from a positive perspective.
Exactly,
too,
positive or negative.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm mentioning it like that is when we look at the Bible, and here's where it's going to tie in. The first thing that we notice in the Bible, going all the way through Genesis, and Steven's gonna love this. Like, one of my favorite like verses from the Bible. It's literally the beginning. Genesis 1:1, and I think if you listen to a lot of the podcasts, I'm always going back to Genesis. So
can't get away from it.
If you've heard this before, I'm sorry.
Never get away from it.
But it's so rich and so good because we all know this. How does the Bible start? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering through the face of the waters. I've read through the ESV Bible, but I wanted to kind of track back to that first and second sentence, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then the second verse specifically, the earth was without form and void. If you do a lot of research and kind of break down what the old text was meaning when those words were written, Moses was hinting at, through God's providence, and God was sharing this through Moses. He was hinting at the earth was filled with chaos. Actually, the word that is used in the old text is a word, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something similar to tohu vabohu. I'm going to say it again. Tohu vabohu. Tohu vabohu. Chaos. And the idea of God bringing order into the chaos is the idea of God speaking, and then the heavens and the earth is formed. God speaking, and then the space is separated, the water is separated. God speaking, and then something else is formed throughout the course of creation. And I love that. I love that so much. And that's such an example of leadership right then and there before we even get to the rest of the Bible. God is already showing us the order of how leadership works. It's bringing order into chaos. Yeah. And going back into this section of like differentiating worldly leadership versus biblical leadership, regardless of whether you're an atheist or whether you're far away from God, leadership is always going to look the same. It's always going to look like bringing order to chaos. The only question is, how are you doing that? Are you doing that by being the person that's going to gain from all that order that's being brought in? Yeah. Or are you the one that's giving it away and elevating your servants, or the people who are serving you, right? Are you the one being served, or are you the one serving? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of how I would approach that. So, yeah.
No, I really, really love that. Yeah. I think it's so good because even when you brought it back to Genesis, it's, most people don't think of it like that, that you are bringing that order to chaos, right? And I love that you're saying, hey, how you bring that order is going to ultimately dictate,
Yeah.
whether or not you're funneling everything
Yeah.
or pouring it out
Yeah.
and directing, like I said, other people's attentions,
Of course.
towards building up other people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I appreciate it. And
That's
I mean,
so good.
to make it another reference, it's basically just the difference between authority versus servanthood. And I think you mentioned that really well is,
Yeah.
are you the one being like gaining all the authority, like funneling it in,
Sure.
making sure that like when somebody sees you, they know that you are the big dog, the big honcho.
Sure.
Or are you expressing servanthood? And I'm sure you guys know this. If you open the Bible, and especially, you start reading about Jesus's walk
Yeah.
in the New Testament, it's all about showing servant hearted. Like there's definitely a place for authority, and we're gonna touch on that. But for the most part, you want to show you being a servant, like instead of funneling it in, expressing it out to
Yeah.
elevate other people.
Well, let's go really quick. Let's
go
tangent
ahead.
off into authority. When you say like, let's touch on authority, and when we say, hey, someone is in authority, what is the, I guess, how should we look at authority in a positive light? Because typically we hear all the time, oh, they're abusing their authority, right? It's usually viewed in a very negative connotation, like, oh, they're so authoritarian, or man, they're just so authoritative over me, right? Where do you see that?
Like, where's that balance?
Where is that balance, and where does the true purpose of having that authority? How should we handle that?
It's funny because I was thinking about that a couple of days ago because I knew that we were going to touch on it. And I think a really good example that I can give in this context right now, a personal example, is from the perspective of being a man, being a black man specifically, and also being a husband and a father. So I'm a black man. I know this sounds weird. And I'm also a husband and a father, right? That comes with a lot of eyes in both negative and positive light, but also it comes with a lot of responsibility, especially being my wife is a white female. If you guys haven't met my wife before, she's from Wisconsin. Go Packers. I know we're in Chiefs territory, but man, you gotta enjoy some cheese sometimes. Anyways, so the example that I want to give is from the perspective of being a father, right? This is my home. This is my living room.
Yeah.
I am the man of the house.
Right.
I have the authority, and I've been given the authority by the grace of God to lead this house as a man. Lead it biblically, lead it and steward it well through God's providence in my life and the ability that He's given me to be a dad and to be a father, right?
Absolutely.
So this is the example that I want to give. Let's say a burglar comes into my house and knocks the door and tries to threaten my family.
Horrible.
Am I called to have authority in that moment? Like, what would it look like if I'm like, hey, Aaron, I think there's somebody here who wants to steal, our possessions and like activities and our plans. Oh, they touch my plans. If somebody touches my plans,
it's on.
You can have the TV, you can have the couch, you can have the electronics, but if you touch the plans, I'll come for you. Anyways, but how would it look like if I'm like giving Aaron, like I'm hiding, in the bedroom or downstairs or whatever the case. I'm like, hey, Aaron, can you go handle that person? Knowing darn well that there's a threat,
right? And
that threat is after my family, right? You would say any reasonable individual will say that I have the responsibility and the authority to address that situation with honor, address that situation knowing that I have to protect my family, and I have to do whatever it takes to protect my family.
Absolutely.
I have to stand in front of my wife. I have to stand in front of my child. I have to stand up in front of my household to protect them from the situation that's coming in. I think that's a great way to picture the idea of authority in that on a day-to-day basis, I'm not going to lord over my wife saying, hey, give me food. I need my lunch. Where's my lunch? My lunch hasn't been served for me in 2 minutes. She can't cook, so that's actually a horrible example. No, but I'm sorry, babe. You can cook. So she's actually a great baker. She's a great baker.
She's a great baker.
But, like, that's not, the authority doesn't give me the leisure or the precedence to lord over my wife and demand things, right?
Right.
That's not what true authority looks like.
No.
Biblically, at the very least. True authority looks like whenever there's a situation where there's chaos, right? Chaos. My responsibility is to bring order into that chaos, whatever that looks like, and to exercise the authority that I have
absolutely.
to stand in front and say, hey, I'm the one that's going to bear the burden. I'm the one that's going to be that initial face to, like for the burglar example, yo, whatever you need to do it with me. Let's handle it together.
Yeah.
Leave my wife at all costs. I'm going to protect my wife. I'm going to protect my kids. So I think that's how I would approach the balance of having authority and presenting it within the context of leadership.
Yeah. I think, I love that example, by the way.
Yeah.
I can totally see you fighting over your plants. Easy. But with that, within that image of authority, like what most readily came to mind when you were explaining that was like you have your small village.
Yes.
I mean, this is your house, but it's your small village, and you have boundaries.
Yes.
And you are...
Oh, that's a good word.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good word. That's a really good word.
you have these boundaries, and you say, hey, within these boundaries, I have the authority of the people who are following me, my wife and my child, Nia, and my dogs, and this is how we are going to walk these day-to-days.
Yes.
I have the authority.
Yes.
I can misuse this authority, but biblically God calls me to set a tone of where we can live and honor God.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's like really, really important to see authority as that is. You are the one who is setting down the rules, either through, actually not either, but both through your words and your actions. Yeah. Right? And one of the things that I read was really good book, Boundaries by Leaders.
Oh, Boundaries.
Boundaries by Leaders by Dr. Townsend and Dr. Henry Cloud.
I think you mentioned that on the last
did.
plug.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yo, Townsend, if you're hearing this, man, sponsor this guy. He's mentioned you twice already.
Yeah. I'm not getting paid. Yeah.
No.
One of the things he talks about is, and this might also be in another book, the Awe of God, or not Awe of God. Gosh, it's escaping me. But anyways, he talks about leaders are ridiculously in charge. And this is leading into our last episode, but when we're talking about leadership and setting like the culture, you can tell Aaron, hey, this is how we're going to do things. This is how we're going to conversate. This is how we're going to communicate. Yeah. But if you don't actually follow up on that, it's never going to happen. She's no longer going to trust you and say, oh, this is how we're going to communicate. This is how we're going to come to decisions.
You're going to fall out of routine.
Exactly. Yeah. And we see the authority being misused. Actually, let's come back to Genesis from the very start. Yeah. One of the biggest decisions in human history that we have is Adam and Eve in chapter 3.
And the authority that they were given.
And the authority that were given.
To garden of the garden.
Yeah. So God gives Adam and Eve the rule of like, hey, you're not going to eat of this tree. Yeah. This one of knowledge of good and evil. Yeah. And Adam being the man who's like, hey, like, this is what God, what God gave us, and this is the rule he set. He had a decision. Yeah. He had the authority to make that decision. Yeah. And his decision was, no. Nah,
I'm going to step back.
I'm going to do my own thing. Yeah. And that sets the tone for thousands of years. Yeah. And we see that, and we don't see the reversal of that till Jesus. Right?
Yes.
So when we say authority, realistically, it's you have the authority to provide influence to other people. And so I think that's really important to understand when we're talking about leadership and authority. When we say misuse, of course there's misuse of authority in terms of, hey, we're hurting people, or there's misuse of people, all of the things. But when we talk about leadership, how are you influencing, how are you presenting yourself, how are you building yourself up to influence other people in a really positive way through the merit of your character and your actions?
Man, that's so good, bro. Like, it's so evident, and it speaks to a lot of the things that we're kind of touching on, and it's so true about just the whole idea of authority. And it's funny, I have a quote here that I sent. I don't know if you remember me sending it to you. So and it speaks so much into it. I'm thinking of the example that you just gave of Adam and Eve, and I can just picture the scene and the setting where Adam is watching his wife, like giving away his authority and watching his wife disobey God. Like the Bible tells us that Eve gives the fruit to Adam, who was with her, right?
Yeah, he was with her. He was there. He was observing it.
And we know what happens in the back end of that story, where it shifts to be a blaming game when God calls Adam and says, hey, how do you know you're naked? Oh, it was the woman that you gave
It
me.
was her fault.
The woman. Oh, it was the snake. The
Yeah.
snake. Oh, you know,
Yeah.
and the quote goes back to, I've actually found this quote on LinkedIn, so I don't really know the source from it, but it was just a picture on LinkedIn, and the quote goes, "Great leaders stand in front when there's blame, and behind when there's praise." I'm gonna say that again. Great leaders stand in front when there's blame, and behind when there's praise.
Why do you like that quote so
I
much?
love that quote so much because put Adam and Eve in that quote. You know,
Yeah.
like let's look at the leadership of Adam. Like this is the first man. This is God's best creation. God created Adam and said it is very good. It was very good.
Yeah.
And you know he's supposed to be the image bearer of our Father, and you know the ultimate leader. You know, shining on God's leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
As God as the head.
Right.
And Adam, the first thing he does, blames.
Yeah.
Great leaders stand in front when there's blame. This dude is like, nah, I'm gonna stay behind my wife. It's the wife. Blame her. She's the
Yeah.
one that gave it to me. You know, she's the one that
Yeah.
gave it to me.
Yeah.
When he should have stood in front, he ended up standing behind.
Mm-hmm.
And then when praise came, which in this case there was no praise.
Right.
But look at another situation where if somebody's given praise, instead of
You can look at the Pharisees.
you can look at the Pharisees. I'm
Yeah.
not even looking. I'm going through First Samuel right now, and I'm reading
Yeah.
through the story of Saul. You know the part
That
where
guy.
Saul like turns his eyes on David when David is being elevated into his role as a king. Or right now he's in the king's guard in the military, but he's going
Right.
to be elevated. And I forget what part of First Samuel it is in, but it says, from that day on forward, Saul had his gaze or his eyes turned towards David.
Oh, yes.
You know,
Yeah,
when
yeah.
David was the one getting
Yeah.
praise. So in that sense, like a great leader who Saul should have been as the first king of Israel, he should have stood behind when David was the one getting the praise.
Actually, know where it's at. It's after the people were
Yeah.
singing praises.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Oh man.
So
yeah.
so that's why I love this quote so much,
Yeah.
because it speaks so much into and even me. Like let me stop like bringing examples from the Bible, and I can speak from my personal example. Like
Oh, yeah.
I know countless moments where I have fallen short, in moments where I'm supposed to be leading in a situation, not even a big situation, a situation like my house.
Yeah.
You know, I'll be brutally honest. Just a week ago, me and Aaron were headbutting, and we had been disagreeing about some things that had been happening, and we got to a point where we were arguing, and
Right.
and I fell short, and you know we were not seeing eye to eye on different things within our marriage, and instead of me showing a quality of being a great leader and standing in front of all the blame, I hid.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I hide is I shut down, and I don't really speak on the things that are bothering me or the things that I'm really wanting to address. And I don't take that ownership right away. I usually, you know, shut down and I go to my cocoon, and then when I'm ready, that's when I come out. And that's such a poor example of leadership. Why? Because it shows me hiding. It shows me retreating instead of standing in front when I need to be blamed, right? Or when I am getting blamed, or when there's a situation of blame.
Right.
So, we don't have to go to Adam. We don't have to go to Saul. Like,
Go to
look
us.
at me.
Yeah.
Literally, look at me.
Go to
Because
us.
that's the dichotomy of
Yeah.
walking through leadership and struggling through leadership.
Yeah.
And learning as you go, and ultimately bringing God into that journey, because
Right.
He's the advocate and the father of
Right,
great
right.
leadership.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why I know we went in a couple of different
No,
ways, but that's why I
okay.
love that word.
Yeah. No, and I love the example you bring of like kind of the walking way, especially in those moments of
Yeah.
conflict,
Yeah.
of where, I mean, one, we can talk about this another time, but conflict is such a good way to start growing. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
But one thing that I've noticed, like in myself, and how vindictive I can be, I feel like that's a really good word to describe myself at times. Is the way I can be vindictive is I'll have some sort of spat with someone, some sort of conflict, where we're probably both right, but we're both definitely wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the part of me that says, okay, the only way that this, like, that we reconcile is this person has to come and apologize to me first. And they better say the
Yeah.
right words to
Yeah.
make me feel like
Yeah.
they felt like...
They felt heard.
They felt like
Yeah.
how much they hurt me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's not the case with like, great leaders. Because that's a very self-serving attitude of, I want to make sure I am being put back in place and everyone has to do it for me. But leaders are saying, great leaders are going to say, no, objectively, the main thing we need to get back to is being in union with one another. That's the main thing. The main thing is not my feelings that were hurt. The main thing is coming back to one another.
Yeah.
And a leader, like that quote said, hey, great leaders are going to stand at the front of the blame game.
Yeah.
Saying, okay, I'm very willing
Yeah.
to get shot in the foot by you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I know it's going to hurt. But I want to get back to walking together. Even if we have to limp together. I will let you shoot me.
Or pierce me.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. And so I think that's I can't remember. I've heard this from a number of people, but the one person who I can think of, Tim Ross, he's another podcaster, and he was a pastor. He would always say, call your own fouls.
Yeah.
And we see this in sports.
Yeah, that's true.
Where, there's players all around who are always faking injuries or faking fouls. We see this in the football world, the soccer world.
A lot. Yeah.
But you actually, it is undeniable. When people praise and say, "That's on me," I'll take the yellow card because that was on me.
Yeah.
And you see the response of that's a guy I want on my team. Because he knows what he did, and he's before the ref even pulls it out. Yeah. He's not arguing. He's saying, that was on me.
He's ready to hold account. Right?
He's ready to hold accountability for what he's done.
Yeah.
And great leaders do that. Great leaders are willing to say, hey, I may have been wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it doesn't even have to be great leaders. It's in the foundation of leadership.
Yes.
In the foundation of leadership, there has to be account being held. You have to hold accountability within the foundations of leadership. Whether you want to be a great leader or whether you're going to be a horrible leader, anyway, you're going to have to hold account, right? Yeah. So I love that you mentioned that. I love that you mentioned that a lot. Let's go to the next kind of section, kind of talking within the biblical leadership structure, right? Something that I found out while I was doing my research is the Bible kind of talks about, and I want to get your input in this as I lay them out to you. The Bible talks about 3 structures of leadership specifically. And the 3 structures are when you skim through the Bible and you find an individual who's being called up to be a leader, or ends up being a leader in some way, shape, or form. They're usually A, which is the called leader or leader who is called. B, a servant king. And C, a wise judge. So some examples of a leader who is called, we have guys like Moses, guys like Abraham, guys like Paul, who sometimes they're called even though it might be a reluctant situation. The example of Paul. Yes. The servant king, the second one. These are examples like David and Jesus. Very loudly, we should see through the servant king that leadership is validated through service and suffering, specifically with Jesus, suffering. And then the third structure that we see in the Bible is the wise judge. So these examples are Solomon and Daniel. In this, we see their type of leadership require discernment and wisdom and order to lead their people and even themselves sometimes. So is that something that you've noticed in the Bible as well? Or what do you think about that? Do you see those 3 aspects coming out, into the worldly leadership? Do you see more? What do you think about those 3 types that I just mentioned?
Yeah, I really like those 3 categories of leadership. I think there's been definitely moments where I've seen that play out, either in my own life, being called to, even when we were starting a Bible study here in Kansas City. Yeah. That I almost felt shoved into it or dragged along into it. I was like, oh shoot, that's a real thing. And I think that is true. The Lord definitely calls people into areas that they are uncertain. And I think that's totally true. As well as a servant, like a servant king. And it's hard to be that servant king, because our natural inclination, I think, is once we get to influence people. I was just talking to someone at school this past week, and he's wanting to run for a leadership position. He's like, man, I really want president position. I don't want VP. And I was like, why would you want president position? He's like, it's just less work. I'm just telling people what to do. VP, I have to actually do all the work.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
that's
it's
true.
like, yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah.
As well as, you know, the wise judge.
Yeah.
And I think those exist. I think I would also, I don't know how I would really say it, but an example that comes to mind is Joshua. I still think like he is a wise judge.
Yeah.
But there's almost like he doesn't necessarily fit. He like fits in all three of these categories, but he's more of, no, I'm just going to lead through leading with my back. And what I mean by that is I'm going there because I'm convinced, like I'm going to do what I need to do because I'm convinced the Lord has me. And whoever's falling behind me, take my back as an example of that's who you're following. And I don't know how to really articulate that like in a nice boxed up term.
The dirty grinder leader. The ones that gets his fingernails dirty.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. And I would agree,
Like you see that, I mean, I would say almost all the disciples of Jesus are that in the regard. They're being thrown into, I mean, take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like they're being thrown in the fire. Daniel's also a great example of that is they don't have these titles and they don't have, I mean, Joshua has a title, but Daniel kind of has a title, but he's in a foreign land. There's no praise that's actually coming to him through his people. He's doing it because he knows it's the right thing. Right? And that's another layer of leadership of where he's kind of dying on the hill that he knows he needs to die on. Right? You know, and he's almost saying like, hey, come what may, but if I'm going to die, I'm going to die.
Yeah, I love that you say that because a certain lady also says very similar
Who
words.
Is that?
Esther. And, you know, if you don't know the story of Esther, like I would really encourage you to read through the book of Esther. And one of my favorite quotes, I think I have it here later in our conversation, is in Esther chapter 4, specifically verse 16. He's he's agreed to help the Jews and he's working to help them out, and gets to a point where he says, hey, like I'm going to help you, and if I die, I die. Like if I perish, she was fully convinced that like her deeds, if they were going to take her to her deathbed, she was fully content for that. And that's the way that she showed her morality and her submission towards ultimately God, but the way that she chose to lead her people or the people that she was trying to help out.
And what I think makes it far more impactful, it actually parallels super well with Daniel. And that's what I love about the Bible. It's not just guys, but it's women also.
Women as well,
But
100%.
Esther's situation is she's actually in a foreign land, and the Jewish people at the time are slaves.
Yes.
And they're not treated the best, but they're still living, but they're out of their own land, and she is in a position where she's married to the king at that time, or the leader at that time. And typically, if the king was unhappy with a decision or unhappy with someone, off with their head. You know. I don't think they used guillotines, but they died. Like they were just killed because the king had that sort of authority, and we see that play out in the story of
100%.
As soon as he writes the decree, his word is law, right? And so she knows that, hey, if the whims of this king, if I'm disagreeing with him and he doesn't find it satisfactory, I could be killed. Right? And she's actually like, she's the wife, like technically she's fine. She doesn't actually have to go out of her way to protect her own skin. Yes, she chooses to, no, this is the right thing, and so be it. Like, if I, for my words that I'm crucified for this. Because this is the right thing.
100%.
Right? And I love that because the stakes are high. The stakes are very, very high.
Especially as a woman. As a woman.
Yes. And so I love that you bring that in. Even just saying the stakes are high is because a lot of times when we look at leadership, the allure of leadership is people are listening to me.
Mm.
But true leadership is shown through the stakes are high, and the small things that I do make some of the largest impacts.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
We see this ripple effect of leaders at the top, of the decisions that you make and the way you say things and how you say it to people ripples down the line to those who are following after you.
Okay.
Right?
I like that. So as I'm hearing us, talk about this and define obviously the foundation and talk about biblical examples versus worldly examples, you might be listening and you might be thinking, okay, where do I start?
Yeah, this
right?
sounds all good and dandy.
This one's all good and dandy, but like you guys haven't gotten to the point of how I can start analyzing what a good leader is and how I can start analyzing that for myself, right?
Yeah.
So let's get
absolutely.
to that. Let's talk about some principles that we can kind of break down and look towards in the path of becoming a leader and a leader that's biblical and good in that. So we kind of wrote down 5 principles that we want to touch on, and as we talk to them, if you have anything that you want to add, please feel free. But the 5 principles that we have is the first one being you have to have a principle of either being called or having a purpose. So calling and purpose. Within this principle, this kind of touches on the burden of leadership. And we have to understand that God calls leaders for his purpose. An example would be, Moses being called by the burning bush, or Paul being met, on his
the road to Damascus.
On his path to Damascus. So with this, analyze that for yourself. Do you feel like you're being called, or do you feel like you have a sense of purpose when it comes to a situation or an area where you're wanting to be leading, right? Is that something that you can kind of touch on?
I think that's 100% correct in terms of like calling and purpose. You want to have that, and I know and we've had conversations about this, off camera and off the mic, is sometimes the calling and purpose, we think it has to be something grand. But ultimately, when we're talking about like ourselves, the purpose I'm created on this earth and who I'm supposed to become, like that in itself is a calling and purpose, right? Are you called to be a better man or a better husband? And knowing that you may not be there now, but you're going to take the steps towards that. And one of the things that I'm super passionate about, and hopefully you guys hear this, one of the things that I think very strongly of someone who understands this is a leader who can do like the very unsexy work in the dark without a title goes so far in realizing your purpose. If you have like something that you're working on, or who you're trying to become is predicated on the praise of like, good job, Akko, like you're doing so good.
You're always seeking validation.
You're always seeking validation, and you're actually need it. Oh, because I'm team lead, or because I'm the manager. Then I will do it. I will only do it if I'm the CEO, or if I'm the one in charge.
Isn't that our culture today though?
We're 100%
always seeking like like I hate to shade on our culture, but I think that's kind of the world we live in today. Right?
And we see it played out in social media, and we've had conversations about that.
Right?
But I think if you really want it to stick, and honestly, some of the best examples of this are people who work out. Are people who work out and who... What's good?
What's up, guys?
You're good.
Welcome.
What's up, guys? Oh my gosh, it's the squad. What's good, y'all? What's up?
Sorry.
How you doing?
No, you good.
No,
you good.
you're Gucci.
No, you good.
No,
you good.
You're good. How you doing?
Yeah.
Oh, let's go.
What's up, baby?
Podcast.
What's up?
Yeah. Good. What's
You're
up?
right. You're right in the.
Right in the middle of
it.
You're right in it. You're standing right in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Oh,
These guys.
We'll be downstairs.
Bet. No, you're good. But getting back to the point is someone who is able to lead very well on their own is someone who says, it doesn't matter who's watching and who's praising me. I'm doing the work for the work itself, for the sake of the work, not for the sake of the praise of other people or the fact that I have a title.
Well, I'll add on to this, not even having the mindset of I'm not worried if somebody's watching me, but more so I'm doing this not for man, but so God can see me, how much I want to live for him and how much I want to lead for him.
Right.
Because ultimately, whether you like it or not, God's watching.
God is watching.
So you
Absolutely.
acknowledging that you're doing this
Yes.
for His glory,
Yeah.
and bringing Him into that conversation,
Yeah.
kind of like a father. Kind of how a child would do it to his father. Like one of
Yeah.
my favorite things is watching Nia play, and then noticing that she's noticing that I'm watching her play, and she would come to me and she would like give me different things, and I'm sure as she gets older she's gonna get to the point where she's like, oh daddy, look what I did, daddy, look at this. Bro, why have we lost that as we grow up? Why do we lose that intimacy in showing our father the things that we do and the way that we lead? I think that's something that God would love, and God would want us to do more things. Like, for example, how beautiful would it look if you accomplish something, and instead of taking it to your friends so they can give you validation, you took it to God and said, hey God, man, look at this, look at what I accomplished, look at what I did, right? I can imagine God saying, wow, like, yes, I know that you're doing this, but thank you for bringing it to me, right? Thank you for bringing the success to me,
right? Absolutely.
But,
all right, what's the second?
Yes.
What's the second principle?
So the second principle is faith and obedience. So this is all about facing the unknown, right? Leaders, we have to trust and obey God even when change is certain, but the path forward is uncertain. And this is kind of foreshadowing because there's an episode that's dedicated through leading through change.
Right.
But here's where faith comes in. Here's where obedience comes in, right?
Yeah.
Understanding that you might not always know the direction forward. You might not always know like what decisions need to be made. You just know that you have to trust that God's gonna carry you through it, and you have to be honorable and responsible as those changes are coming. So this is definitely a principle that is important when assessing like if you're a leader or if you're wanting to be a leader.
Why do you think that's important? Because that's almost strange to say, like, oh, I thought followers have to be obedient to the leader. So why do leaders have to be obedient?
Well, I'll say it this way. One of my favorite commentators right now, his name is Jordan B. Peterson, and he has a lot of podcasts. If you guys check him out, he's a little bit hard to understand for a select crowd, but he's really good in the way he articulates what he believes in. And I think he was a psychologist or something like that.
He's a clinical
psychologist, right? But one something that he would say is the hero's journey requires stepping into the unknown and confronting the dragon of chaos. A hero's journey is all about stepping into the unknown and confronting the dragon of chaos. And the reason why I'm mentioning this quote is, picture yourself as a hero. You know that there's this whole conquest. You don't know the way there, but you do know that you have to get there. You don't know how strong or big the dragon might be,
right?
But you know that there's a dragon that you have to defeat,
yeah.
And your whole motive, your whole persona, your whole journey is getting everything that you need to get to that place where that dragon is, and slay that dragon, and then get the princess. Let's apply this biblically. You know, we have Jesus and his journey to the cross. You know, Jesus knew from the moment he came into this earth, because he was fully man, but he was also fully God, right? He knew from the moment he could even think as a human being. My journey is to go to the cross, to go face the dragon of death. That is my journey. So all his life, we can watch him. We don't really know a lot of his early childhood life, but we know a lot of it when it comes to his ministry, right? From the moment he turned 30 to 33, and the way he led his family, the way he led his disciples, the way he led himself. His preparation was to the cross, and he kind of foreshadowed that to us. He told us, and he told his disciples specifically, "I'm going to the cross. I'm going to the cross. I'm not going to be here. I'm going to go." And they didn't understand it at the time, but for him, because he was the hero, he's the ultimate hero.
Yes,
he knew that path towards death, towards the dragon.
Yeah.
Are we going to sit here and say that he knew exactly how it was going to happen? Not. You know, like, we wouldn't say that, but we can confidently say that he knew that there was a direction there, right? Yeah. And then on the opposite side of that, he met death at the cross, metaphorically speaking. And then not only that, he conquered death through God raising him from the grave. And then while he was dead, what did he do when he was down in the grave, the 3 days that he was dead? He was down in the depths of Hades, getting the keys from back from Satan.
So hell,
you know, that was him slaying the dragon twice for it. And it's such an amazing picture, and that's why I love the faith and the obedience that he portrayed going through that journey of uncertainty.
Yeah, sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that 100% makes sense. And I actually want to touch, because you brought in Jesus, and I love how you said in his obedience he had to have his own journey.
Yes.
And what's so funny, not funny, but what's so interesting about the narrative of Jesus is when he's up with God and he's in the triune of the Holy Spirit, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, he's actually completely fulfilled.
Yeah.
He's completely fulfilled.
Yeah.
But in his obedience, he had to say, I'm taking on a role where I'm no longer enough. I'm becoming fully man.
Yeah.
And that's in a space of where he's saying, hey, I'm going to have to metaphorically be unfulfilled and know what it means to learn how to be fulfilled as a man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tie this in with this. It's like it's probably a Chinese proverb, but it's, if you imagine everything that you are is a cup of tea. And if you believe like you know everything and you're already doing what you need to do, your cup is completely full and you can't add anything more. Okay. If you can't add anything more, why would you be obedient? Because if you try to add more, it's just going to spill out and burn your hands. So I'm never going to step out of my comfort zone of where God's calling me, because my cup's full. This is who I am. Okay. Right? And oftentimes what God calls us to, in obedience, he says, you need to step out from who you think you are, empty your cup or your soul, and I'm going to fill it up with something different. Okay. But I can't do that until you're willing to pour yourself out. Yeah. And that's exactly what God says to Jesus, because Jesus, he's like, I'm fully God. Yeah. But I'm taking on this thing of fully man, and I have to step down, empty my cup of what used to fulfill me, and I need to learn.
And sometimes it's hard to, sorry to cut you off, but sometimes it's hard to empty out your cup because you know what's in your cup.
You're so convinced.
You see it. You're living it. You're drinking it. So the idea of you pouring it out and then getting refilled by someone else or ultimately God, you're kind of scared because you don't know what he's going to pour into your cup. Exactly. You don't know the burdens and the tribulations, the trials that he's going to pour into your cup to fulfill his glory. Why? Because hey, I'm already content with what I have, and I want this tea is good, and it's not the best tea, but it's my tea. It's good. Yeah. And I love that proverb so much because I'm a sucker for imagery, so that it makes so much sense though. It makes so much sense.
And we see Jesus even pulling in that proverb. Yeah. He's not Chinese, but he does pull in that proverb in the Garden of Gethsemane where he's talking and says, hey, this is my cup and you're filling it. If I have to drink from this, take it away, but if I must, I will. Right?
Imagine if Jesus did not the cross. Because he didn't know what God was pouring into it. Oh, man. Rough. All that being said, we wouldn't be here. That's the reality. We would not walking the journey that we're walking.
Absolutely not.
Thank you, Jesus, for facing the uncertainty. Okay, the third one. Yes. All right, so the third one, we have humility and servanthood. Mm-hmm. So within this principle, we're talking about the rejection of tyranny. Mm-hmm. The way I want to describe that is leaders, and we've touched on this quite a bit, so we don't have to spend too much time on this one, but leaders prioritize service. An example is Jesus obviously humbling himself and washing disciples' feet. I think that's a really good example of Jesus showing humility and showing servanthood, because Jesus is God. We just got done talking about, he has the full authority and the full power to be the type of leader that says, hey, funnel through me. I want to be the one that's glorified. Would he be wrong in saying that? Absolutely not. Ultimately, we live to glorify God. Mm-hmm. But in the context of Jesus being the man and walking the earth in the time that he did, his priority wasn't look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm the big G God, and you should worship me. It's hey, I'm here to show you how to serve. Right. I'm here to show you how to love. Yeah. I'm here to show you how to forgive. I'm here to show you how to trust. Absolutely. Right? I'm here to show you my Father. Yeah. Right? So he shows humility and servanthood so perfectly by that scene where he washed the disciples' feet. Why? Because in that culture, in that context, their feet are disgusting. They're dirty. It was the lowliest of the lows of things that we had to do, or people had to do at that time to show servanthood or to show leadership. If you were washing people's feet at that time, you're not a leader. You're the beggars and and the
You're
servants
the
who
lowest
were
of the low.
yeah. So for Jesus to say, "Hey, I'm gonna wash your feet,"
Absolutely.
that's the ultimate example of
Yeah.
humility and servanthood.
I'm gonna touch on the leadership part.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not because I don't love what you said,
No,
but
you're good.
when we talk about humility, I think oftentimes like, okay, don't be prideful.
Yeah.
And one of the most subtle ways that I've seen humility, like pride, sneak in, either in like different marriages or even in like people around me, and even in myself, especially in men, especially in men, is I can do it all myself.
Ooh. Yeah. You can say that again.
I can do it all myself.
I can do it all myself.
And I'm going to do it all myself because it's going to be a better job if I just do it myself.
Yeah.
It's better because there's less headache if I just do it myself and no one else helping me. It's just easier. And that's, even though like we see that, like Jesus 100%, again, he could have flown around on a cloud like Goku from Dragon Ball and said, I am God, right? And turn back to me. He could have 100% done that.
Yeah.
But he shows ultimate humility in saying, since I'm fully man, I know I don't have the longest life here on earth. So I'm going to spread the work.
Yeah.
And I'm going to elevate other people to my position.
Yeah.
And he does that with his 12 disciples, right? Some of them don't do well. Some of them, Judas ends up stabbing him in the back and killing him. But the others go and are elevated. And he even says in the Bible, he says, you know, I'm going to leave you a helper, and greater works are you going to do than I've done here on this earth.
Yeah.
And so what a great leader does, in my opinion, with the humility, is knowing I can't be here forever.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put my focus on other people and raising up other people to do what I can do, and we can share the burden.
100%. Yeah.
So to synthesize that all in one is, for you guys, leaders understand like the finite reality of their stewardship or of their time leading other people, and build up others well to take over.
I like that. That's really good, bro. That's really good. I love that.
That's going to lead into our last one for family.
It is.
Don't worry.
I know. I can already... bro, there's so much... I love this, man. I love this. Hopefully you guys are liking this as well. And please, a quick plug, like if there's anything that you're listening and you're hearing and you're wanting to respond, we do have the comment section. We do have options on our Spotify's and Apple podcast to respond to us. And then if you know us in person and talk to us, share with us. Hit me. Please don't steal my plans. No, but definitely communicate with us, because we want to hear from y'all's perspectives as well, because you know, all these things, we're going through them as well. He's not the perfect leader. I for sure am not the perfect leader. We're on this journey of discovering, like, how can we be better? How can we look at God and ask God, hey, help me get closer to you. Help me with the equipment that I need to lead my family, lead my work, lead my et cetera, et cetera. But with that being said, the fourth principle that we're going to touch on is courage and perseverance. So courage and perseverance. So this is more so the necessity of suffering. We kind of touch this a lot, especially with the context of biblical leadership, because that's what it is. It's suffering, or there is going to be an aspect of, actually, I'll take it one step further. It doesn't even have to be biblical leadership. Leadership in general invokes suffering. There is going to be suffering within leadership. But the way you portray that, are you gonna have courage and perseverance, right? Are you gonna voluntarily suffer for the greater cause, or are you gonna sit back and hide and blame somebody else or push somebody else to suffer on your behalf? And two quick examples, I'm sure you have more, that I would give is Esther, which we already mentioned, knowing that she could get killed, you know, for what she did. But she said, if I perish, I perish. And then another great example that you mentioned and I loved so much is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you know, going into the furnace and being burned alive. And they were ready. They were like, hey, I have the courage, and I'm going to persevere because I know the God that I serve. And if I have to meet him, you know, today, I'm ready for that. I'm in no way going to denounce the God that I serve just to please you because you're invoking fear onto me. And I love Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for that. And I can only aspire to have that sense of courage in my daily life. But what other examples might you have within the context of courage and
perseverance.
Yeah,
I mean, you're stealing them.
I know, but I almost didn't because we already mentioned them, so I was kind of like.
I think you're great.
I'm sorry, I stole. They were really good examples, bro.
They are. I think a great one would be Paul. A great one would be Paul.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, and not only courage to step into situations, but the courage and perseverance to face yourself. Mm-hmm. I think Paul is such a great example of that, of being able to look at himself when he was Saul and say, I have a problem. Mm. And I'm going to stick with myself and stick with it to continue chasing after God. Okay. And if I want to chase after God, some things need to be removed.
Yeah.
And that's such a good example of like self-leadership is because oftentimes we're too scared to look at ourselves and say we're the problem. Mm. I think this is a C.S. Lewis thing. He had written one of his books and had said, sin is actually one of our strongest veils. Mm. No, not sin. It was rationalization is one of our strongest veils to seeing how wretched we really are. Hmm. If we really knew what we were really like at our core, it would destroy us. Because that's how far away we are from the Lord. And we rationalize and say, no, I'm actually an okay person. I'm
trying to make peace with it.
I'm trying to make peace with it. And a leader says, I'm willing to like dive underneath of who I really am and die that. And I'm going to trust and persevere that God is going to pull me out of like the abyss of myself. Yeah. And it's hard to do that.
No, it is.
It's hard to do that. And it's very hard to do that when you're convinced, I have already done it.
Yeah. But that's why leadership as a whole exists. Yes. Because if there was no leaders, then there would not be people saying, hey, like I'm willing to go past like what I'm okay with.
Yes. Absolutely.
Like I'm willing to break the
mold.
The mold and take that next step and suffer a little bit more, struggle a little bit more, persevere a little bit more. Yeah. And that's what honestly true leadership is. It's knowing the limit that we have and trusting and knowing that we can take a little bit an extra step past that limit. Yeah. Why? Because we're bringing that responsibility. We're bearing that responsibility. Yeah. I love that, bro. Yeah. Okay, let's start putting up a principle. The fifth one we have is integrity and character. And we've already touched a lot about this, Stephen. I think the whole episode has kind of alluded to. Ultimately, a leader has to have character, and they have to be they have to show a sense of moral. They have to have a moral foundation.
Like a moral compass.
Exactly. They have to have a moral compass. And one of the quotes that I love, and it's a very Jordan B. Peterson type quote, going back to the guy. The quote goes, "A leader without integrity is a tyrant waiting to emerge." A leader without integrity is a tyrant waiting to emerge. And I think about that quote and I'm like, man, it's probably not always true in every single situation, but if you actually think about it, like what is leadership without integrity? It's full on authority and who is integrity? Integrity is breath from God. We look at the fruit of the Spirit when we break down Galatians, and we know that moral compass ultimately comes from God. Yeah, and if absolutely. we don't have that moral compass tied toward our Father and God, who do we have it tied to? Paul loves to talk about it. He said, you either worship God or you worship the devil. Yeah. So I would take that back and say a leader without integrity is a tyrant waiting to emerge. That's 100% correct, because if you're not leading with integrity, you're leading with sin. Yeah. I think that's just a really good way to capture that. But what do you think about that?
I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. I think that's so true. And that leads the integrity and character. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talking heads, and I can't deny that we might be talking heads at
honestly,
point, there's a lot of podcasts, and we are in the age of information. Yes. Of where there's so much information crisscrossing, and I actually heard this of where it used to be if you knew more information than the other person, then you were the leader. Yeah. And this was back in like the Renaissance days or whatever. But now with the crisscrossing of cultures and information, now it's okay, who are you with that information? Mm-hmm. And it matters so much
Yeah.
more in this day and age, and it shows up more in different work cultures, at church,
Yeah.
and social settings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the integrity and character, it's just who you are without speaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's who you are without speaking. It's how you treat
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah.
And
Like how you're portrayed
and
as
how
well.
you're portrayed.
Yeah.
And again, this is all with, man, when I was working at, my dental office, we had, our rules or whatever, the standards,
Mm-hmm.
and you have like, okay, these are the expectations
Yeah.
for, how we're supposed to,
Mhm.
what are my job titles
Yeah.
and all the
Like
things.
your standards of practice.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank
Yeah.
you. But ultimately, it was down to, am I being a good worker? Like, am I actually adding value into this office? And if I am doing it, people would start following after me. And if I didn't, people would follow after me, and we
Yeah.
would kind of fall apart, and we'd have to have a meeting.
Yeah.
Right? And so ultimately, that's what really sticks. And when I talked about, like, hey, leaders are trendsetters, you can still be a leader without integrity or character. But like you said, you're going to lead with, like, back into chaotic
Yeah.
times, and it's
Yeah.
going to be back to...
You're going to have a compass, right?
Yeah.
The compass belongs to God, or it belongs to somebody else.
somebody else.
Yeah.
And so when you're wanting to set the culture, it is not just the words on the page, it's your everyday walk and step with people. Right? And that's the integrity and character.
Yeah.
Who are you really in those quiet moments where no one's looking?
I love that. Okay, man, that was a lot.
Yes.
That was a lot. So we've defined leadership, right?
Yes.
And we've talked about a difference between biblical leadership versus worldly leadership.
Absolutely.
Talked about a little bit of a structure of what we see
Yeah.
within biblical leadership.
Yeah.
We've also talked about practical examples and principles that we see in leadership. What about you, man? I'm gonna ask to kind of wrap this up.
Yeah.
What's your personal journey been towards your path towards leadership? Because I obviously, like, I view you as a leader. I've walked in the relationship that we have together for the last 3.5, pushing 4 years, which is also crazy. Like, that's a point.
nuts.
We've known each other
my
for almost
gosh.
4 years, but I've seen your leadership play out.
Yeah.
I've seen it triumph. I've seen it fail. I've seen. But I want you to kind of explain to the audience, like, what's your leadership journey look like, right?
Yeah. So in terms of how I started growing as a leader, one easy way is, you could say, keep saying yes, which I don't always agree with that.
Yeah.
But in terms of kind of as a callback to the teacup example, is I had to get really comfortable with saying I don't know. As soon as I thought I knew everything there is to know, that's when I stopped being a good leader.
Okay.
Whether that came to my own growth or how I interacted with other people. And what I mean by that is, if I stopped staying curious on what I may not have, that was me convincing myself there's nothing for me to go and explore.
Okay.
And leaders are ones who move people either in the setting that they're at, or move people to a certain destination. And if I've told myself there's nothing for me to walk around and explore because I know everything I need to know, I've ultimately failed myself. And so a lot of it came down to, even if I think I know how I want to do something, whether that be community group or reading the Bible, in a lot of conversations I would like close my eyes and say, you know what? I'm going to act like I don't know anything. Tell me your worldview. Tell me your perspective.
Yeah.
And that has helped me so much to developing to be the leader I am, and just asking questions.
Yeah.
I have a good way to put this, and this is, I don't think this is a direct quote from Proverbs, but I've gleaned this from Proverbs, is to be a fool is to act wise. To be wise is to play the fool. And ultimately, if you want to be a wise leader, it would behoove you to be foolish and keep gathering information.
Okay.
And then sift through it and know what works well. But to be a foolish leader is to say, I'm good. I don't need anything. I'm good with where I'm at.
Okay.
I don't need any input. I don't think anyone has anything for me.
Yeah.
And so I had to really humble myself and say, as smart as I think I may have been given gifts to discern, I need to trust that God is putting people in my life to teach me more.
Yeah. I like that. And I think what I would add to that as a friend and a brother is throughout the years, I've kind of going back to the structure of leadership, like the 3 examples that we find in the Bible. I know that you've resembled a leader that has wisdom, and a lot of it, I will say. And it's played out in the way that you've poured out into me, first and foremost, the way you've poured out into my wife, the way you've poured out into the community that we're in, and also the way you pour out into yourself. It shows that God has given you the gift of wisdom and the gift of connection, connecting with people and using the wisdom to elevate them in a place where they didn't think that they could get to, right? At least in the season of life that they're in. So I would agree with you in that statement of just saying yes and being ready or preparing to get ready to be in a position where God can use you to elevate the things that He wants you to elevate, to the people that He wants you to connect with. But yeah, I think I've definitely seen that played out really well to the point where I can call you a leader that is worthy to be followed and worthy to be praised. So I really appreciate you for that, man. I really do.
In retrospect of that, where I've seen you, and if you guys know Akko, this should be easy. He's not, yes, you categorize all 3 of the categories of the leaderships that we described, but man, the one that I admire most about you, and if you get to know Akko, this is so true, of the one who is willing to walk through the mud and the mire. The same way Joshua did, the same way Jesus has done for us, that's been exemplified through your walk. Even from the testimony you gave before I knew you and here in Kansas City, that's something you exemplify so well, and that I think a lot of people see that and still at times don't fully understand the unsexy work you've done on yourself that just looks so ugly and wretched, and you've been willing to crucify that to yourself. That's something that's so key, and again, it's something I deeply admire. Deeply admire about you.
I appreciate that.
In that it's just such a rare characteristic to be able to do that and do it when it hurts. That's that's such a key point of leadership that is, it's incredible.
I appreciate that.
But for you, looking again, all of that, I want you to kind of round it off of looking back on what has kind of been a driving principle that has led you to become the leader you are, of hey, when you first started your journey of becoming a leader, what has kept you on the path and still looking forward?
Yeah, I think to put it very simply is I genuinely believe that God has called me to be a leader. And the way that He's called me to be a leader is through the testimony that I did not want to share for the longest time in my life, to now I feel like I always saw my testimony and my story and my life upbringing and the context that I grew up in as my personal struggle with myself and my God. And I always felt so dirty, showing that to other people and trying to explain it to other people. But throughout the years, God has really shown me the beauty of my story, because ultimately it's not even my story. I'm just the vessel that's being portrayed. It's his story, right? Yeah. And I think the ultimate theme of that story that God has written through me is the story of rags to riches spiritually. It's the story of, hey, you've gone through a situation where you did not have, and now you have in abundance. And I'm not talking about money. I'm not talking about fame. I'm not talking about stature. I'm talking about life. I'm talking about spirit. I'm talking about love. Actually, that's what I'm talking about. Love. And because you have that journey from start to finish or from left to right. I'll need you. I don't even need you. You're gonna show it to other people, right? And I think that's been the way I've received it and the way I've seen it and the way I've understood it and defined it in my personal life, to where I know that I'm a vessel that needs to be used and has to be used to share other people. Hey, if I've gone through what I've gone through, what makes you think you can't? And I'm gonna show you through my story and my scars that, hey, you can do it too. You can do it too. And I know you have your own story, you have your own scars, you have your own journey. But let's share it together, and let's give each other examples that we can use as stepping stools to get to the next stage and the next level, right? And for me, I think the way I view leadership through all that is, it's not always about elevating myself. It's not always about elevating my power, though there's moments where I need to elevate that power, absolutely. Right? No, it's about taking on the burden and the responsibility of suffering, because there is going to be suffering, and and knowing that I get to suffer is pleasing in a way, because I know that there's gonna be a blessing after that suffering. And really quickly, the way I can bring that to light is one of the most beautiful flowers is a rose. But before you get to the rose, you have to get through the thorns and the thistles. You know, before you get to the bud, there's always the thorns. And I think that's my life in a nutshell, where, and I'm not gonna say I've been through all the thorns and the thistles already. I'm still even going through that right now, and that comes with seasons. And right now, I'm in a season of blessing, but I know that on the horizon there's gonna be another season of suffering. And knowing that that's the case, kind of like the hero's journey I was mentioning earlier, I'm excited for that. You know, I'm excited knowing that I'm gonna go through suffering, and I know I'm gonna struggle. I know I'm gonna need my friends and my family and ultimately my God to help me through it. But I'm not gonna shy away from it, right? And I think that's been my journey, and it's gonna continue to be my journey as long as God allows me to be the leader that I am in the capacity that I've been in. So I think that's how I would kind of wrap up my journey towards leadership.
That's beautiful. I love that.
No, thank you so much, bro.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what about you guys?
Yeah.
What does your leadership journey look like? You know, do you view yourself as a leader? Do you want to be viewed as a leader? Have you taken the steps and utilize the principles that we mentioned towards that journey? And what does that look like for you? Definitely let us know.
Yes, please.
And we're gonna add some questions on this specific episode for you guys to like ponder on and talk about with your friends, families, and even yourself. And and stay tuned. Steven, what's our next episode?
Next one, we've already, it feels like we've alluded to it so much, but our next one is the cost of leadership and spiritual warfare. And
yes,
it's
that's all we're gonna say. That's all we're gonna say.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So definitely stay tuned. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Peace.